if you don't mind taking your pew pads and to fill those things out, that would be wonderful. That way we see who's in the house and who may be missing. The weather's finally getting good. When you know the weather finally gets good, then we have the time change. I know I'm a creature of habit. I'm looking forward to going home and taking a nap. That way I could stay up too late and go through the same thing again tomorrow. I woke up a little bit late. I'm the kind, I don't know if you do, I set the alarm every night, but I wake up before the alarm rings. I'm afraid the way that thing buzzes, it's going to give me a coronary some morning. And I did that this morning. I said, all right, I have 5 more minutes. So I turned off the alarm, and guess what happened? I fell back to sleep, and I'm just off, and I'm off kilter. So if you're a little bit sleepy, even if you nod off, I will not be offended. I know exactly how you feel. In fact, on Sundays like this, my cadence is a little bit off, so I don't know if when I preach this morning if I'm going to go for 15 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, but we'll see how things end out. Are you ready this morning? I am too. Let's read the good word from the Gospel of Mark. When Jesus landed and he saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Now by this time it was late in the day. So his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, well, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? Well, how many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Now taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and they were satisfied. And the disciples, they picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. We know this story well. In your Bible, it's called the feeding of the 5,000. This and the resurrection are the only miracles of Jesus that appears in all 4 Gospels. This one's written by Mark. In the very first verse of his Gospel, he points out, now this is the reason why I'm writing this, so you will understand that this Jesus of Nazareth is the Christ, and he is the Son of God. And here he will show he was there to meet people's needs. Many who saw this happening thought that this Jesus was like a second Moses, and they remembered the miracle of Moses in the wilderness, where there was manna that came from the heavens to feed them for 40 years. And they thought that maybe this was the prophet of which Moses talked about in the book of Deuteronomy. And it was. But yet he would direct them not just to the bread that they were eating, but he wanted them to understand that he would be the living bread that they could take in their lives and it would satisfy them forever. What I'm going to do this morning, we just looked at Mark's Gospel because I'm doing a series leading up to the Easter time, but I'm also going to interject some scriptures of what John has to say to supplement our understanding. And there's 4 parts of this story I want you to see this morning, of the story we know so well. The first part I want you to see is what I call the following. The following. There, as Mark and John also points out, that Jesus was there on the Sea of Galilee, and there was a large crowd of people. Now over in the Gospel of John, he makes mention, you're only following me because you see the signs. So in another church, he would call that the come and see crowd. That when something dynamic, or there's a dynamic speaker, or there's something, a nuance, people would just come out of the droves just to see it, although it be short-lived. We probably remember when we had 9/11 and every house of worship in America was filled, but that was gone in a week or two. The come and see crowd, no matter how good it was. But it's about springtime, a day just like today, because it's pointed out this was about the Passover time, or close to a time you and I call Easter. The following was there's a large crowd, but it led to a dilemma. The large crowd, secondly, led to a dilemma. Now, John's Gospel in verse 5 of chapter 6, he makes mention that Jesus saw a large crowd, and he asked one particular disciple. His name was Philip. He asked this question, where are we to buy this bread so that they may eat? Now, Jesus was concerned that this crowd was taken care of. Mind you, they probably would not have starved to death had they not eaten that day. But he wanted to show this crowd something, and he wanted to show Philip something. And I think on purpose he asked Philip this particular question, because Philip was a logical thinker, and he would answer with a human answer. He knew Philip lived just about 9 miles away in the town called Bethsaida, and if he said, well, we can go to my nearby town and we can get them some food. But he wanted to see what Philip would answer, and he had wondered, would he answer with a human solution, or would he answer through a supernatural answer? Well, he gave a rational answer. Now, defined what you just read there about the 8-month wages, what he's talking about, you know, Jesus, 200 days of wages wouldn't be enough to even feed this big crowd of 500 men, plus women and children, just a little bit of bread. See, what Philip does there is assess the probable cost, and nothing wrong with that. In fact, Jesus encourages this in the gospel. It says, now, if someone is going to build a tower, does he not first sit down and he counts the cost? We get that. The problem with Philip is he only stressed the seeming hopelessness of the situation. And he forgot that the Son of God was in his midst. Do you remember last week's message? I know sometimes it's hard to think. But I preached the miracle of when Jesus calmed the storm. Philip was just there. And it's interesting in what Philip does and does not to say over in the Gospel of John. You think Philip might say, well, you know, Jesus, it's true. I'm a dollars and cents man, and that math does not add up. We couldn't feed them much. But Jesus, you know, if you're able to calm the storms, I don't think feeding this crowd's going to be a problem. But he doesn't do that. You see, what Philip does, he limits what the Lord can and cannot do, and assumes what the Lord will and will not do. Now, I say that because, folks, sometimes, hang with me, God causes us, or he calls us to do something which is beyond ourselves. And he does that because he wants us to understand that the only way we could have done it is with God. Because without God, it could not have been done. Then we do it and we realize, praise God, because it's the only way it could have been done. Well, that's a dilemma. Jesus is looking, thirdly, for the solution. I got a problem. What's the solution? John's Gospel points out that one of the disciples, Andrew, Peter's brother, brings someone to Jesus. It's a young man, a boy, and he's there with his sack lunch. Sack lunch having how many loaves of bread? Do you remember? Go ahead and say it. 5. I don't know. They're barley loaves. I don't know if they were like biscuits or they were like pita bread, but it's small. And he has how many fish? You know the word. 2, and they might have been no bigger than sardines. But you think, okay, we got a kid here, sack lunch, 5 little biscuits, 2 little sardines or whatever it is. But what's that going to be for a large crowd? But there's a contrast. You see Philip's pessimism. And Andrew brought up a boy who volunteered his lunch. Now, I've got a point here. Hang on. He knew it wasn't much, but it was something. These disciples are contrasted with this youngster who brought what he had. Now, they had more resources than this little boy. The disciples, they had a treasury. At least they had some resources they can go and buy something, but you notice they didn't offer anything. The boy gave what little he had, and it made the difference. If we offer nothing to God, He will have nothing to use. You know, God is able to do anything. You know, when I stop and think about it, God really didn't need this. I mean, He spoke and all this happened. He could have just make it pop out of the air. But a lot of times God chooses to use human resources and standards to accomplish His will. Whether it's to serve or to witness or to give, He uses human people. And I like the fact He used this young boy. You know what it's telling me? Age is no barrier in serving God. I don't know how old this boy was, 4, 5, 8, 10, but He still used him. And I like that principle because we want you to understand, if you become a member of this family called the Austin Christian Church, you know, we're not just trying to draw a crowd, we're trying to make disciples. We want you to serve in some way. If you're a little kid, I liked it when we did the seniors banquet. I thought it was so cute seeing those kids serve me, you know. I'm not an old timer, but I still like seeing it look cute, and I like that they're serving and their teachers are having them serve people. And if you're an older person, even if you're 90s, you could still be greeting people and doing stuff. Age is no barrier to serving God. But I like the story because, you know, at certain times in our lives, do we not sometimes feel a little bit insignificant and useless? I mean, sometimes it seems like we're surrounded with people who have greater talents than we have. Folks, you could never get me to get up and sing after Katie and Jay sing, you know. Matter of fact, if you listen on Sunday morning on the way to church, you never hear me sing on the tape. That's why I lip sync, because it sounds not good. I don't have that ability, and I could, Lord, I don't have the talent that those people have. Or sometimes I think my giving is not to the number of so-and-so. So I could think, I'll just sit back, I won't do anything, I don't want to be embarrassed, or what difference would what I have make anyway? But I don't want you to forget the truth that Jesus does the multiplying. Do you see in the story, He needed the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and it wasn't much, but He needed that to multiply. Folks, I want you to understand, if you are breathing, you have something to offer, and it can make all the difference in the world. Here we are at the Austin Christian Church building. How many of you realize that this building this year is 20 years old? You go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. How many have not woke up yet? Raise your hand. Okay. That's okay. I told you that's okay. It takes me about a month or two, doesn't it, you? Just joking. This building's 20 years old. Wow. Where's time gone? Do you know of all the church buildings I've ministered at, this is probably the most efficient building. It's got more use per square inch, but that's one point. Do you know the person who made this possible? I'm not talking about God, I mean human beings. Do you know who the person was that put us over to the top to finance the building of this building? Everybody. The person that gave $1, the person that gave thousands of dollars. They made the difference. Next week we're going to be doing pledges with the missions. And I've been thankful to be with congregations that missions were very important. I know, man, you know, whether it's Cram, whether it's Cradle, last place it was the Children's Home, the place before that, Fame. We're the people who sent out all those letters for them up Columbus. The church before that, Little Cortland Church, the ladies every month would go to the Christian nursing home in Brownstown and volunteer. I'm so glad. But you want to know who's going to make all the difference in our missions giving and sharing and all those victories you see out there on the bulletin board and that you see in the bulletin on that white paper? You know who made the difference? Everybody did. I mean, there's probably some people says, I don't have anything left when I come to church, and the only thing I could do is bring some canned goods and put to the H2O, and I don't know if that makes a difference. Do you know, the other day I was driving by and I saw some dad go into one of those receptacles, and he pulled out some canned goods, and it was good, nutritious food from what I could see. That night, because you're given, a family got fed. And you made all the difference in the world. All is needed to accomplish for God's kingdom. I think of all the people who came forward to give their lives to Jesus Christ. And you know who is responsible for that? Everybody. Everybody. It's not just the preacher's talk. It takes so many touches. I don't know what made them convinced that I'm going to go with Jesus. I don't know. It could have been an elder's meditation. It could have been one of Jay's or one of the singer's songs, and it's the words to it. You know, you might not have understood the tune of that first song, but I was able to read the words, and I thought it had a great message. You know, you don't know if it's someone being friendly to let them know that God's people are good people, or someone did something. I don't know. Or it could have been all together. But we're supposed to use our all and give into the hand of God. There was a conductor, an orchestra conductor by the name of Sir Michael Costa. He was conducting a rehearsal one day, and the drums were playing, and the trumpets were blaring, and the violins were playing, and there was one piccolo player who kind of muttered under his breath. He says, I'm just one dinky little piccolo player. No one can hear me. I might as well not be in playing. But all of a sudden, when he didn't play, the orchestra leader said, Stop! Where's the piccolo? It was missed by the most important person of that orchestra. And it's the same thing when we have talents and resources and abilities. Now, we may have developed them, and we may have managed it, but remember, God gave it to us on loan for the performance of life, and He wants us to use it. Now, let's get back to the story. I know it sounds too much like preaching. Now that Jesus had something with which to work, He gave the strategy. Did you see it? He had the disciples to put them in groups of hundreds and fifties, and it says Jesus took bread, and He gave thanks. And the original word is what our Catholic brethren use for the word Eucharist. And a lot of people see in this is where Jesus is given a foreshadowing of His body being broken upon the cross. The place where we find our redemption. But I want you to understand in the story, Thanksgiving came first, and then came the miracle of provision. You see, God gives an abundance. He can take whatever we have to offer, whether it's resources, whether it's talents, whether it's time, and He's able to multiply it. But we've got to take the first step. And that led to the fourth thing of the story. I call it the results. He multiplied it. I mean, it multiplied so well after He broke the bread that they had enough for leftovers. So much leftover, they were able to gather up 12 baskets. I don't know where He did with the baskets, but He used them somewhere. I like the story of someone who once baked a loaf of bread. By the way, how many of you had mamas and grandmas that baked bread? Oh man, there's nothing better, is there? I mean, you're able to take that and you put some butter and it tastes so good. Is there a better taste in the world? How many of you smell that in your nose right now? Oh, my goodness, that's good. But this person baked a loaf of bread. There are 4 people there. One stepped up to it and pinched it and said, well, this feels very fresh. The bread's unsliced. Understand? Oh, this unsliced bread, it feels fresh. The other one looked at it and says, oh, yeah, that looks just perfect. The other one says, oh, that smells good. You know what the 4th person did? They went and they pinched off that bread and they ate it and says, oh, man, now that tastes good. Do you get the point? Unbroken bread is useless. Well, what's that mean with the story? Go back to the story. One day, Jesus faced 5,000 hungry men, plus women and children. But only by putting to the hands of the Father the broken 5 loaves and the 2 fishes could he miraculously feed a multitude. Not only did this miracle foreshadow Jesus Christ's brokenness on the cross, but it pointed out in John's gospel that he would be the bread of life available to us all. But you have to understand, the bread had to be broken to be useful. And folks, I want you to understand, it's the same with us. We need to be broken. Our wills need to be broken before we're useful to God. We need to come to that place where we have to understand, as Jesus says, Lord, before you I am spiritually bankrupt. I have very little to offer into your whole universe. I'm just little old me. But Lord, I take my brokenness, I put it into your hands, and then God is able to give the increase through it. He makes the difference. You see it in the Bible. There was Moses. He had to spend 40 years in a desert, being broken down by God before God would use him for 40 years leading the children of Israel through the wilderness. You see Joseph, this sweet little young man who had these dreams, but he had to be broken in the prison cell for 13 years before God was able to catapult him to be the second most prominent person in all of the Egyptian empire, and he saved God's children. He used this young lady by the name of Esther who won a beauty contest. And she was caught in a dilemma in which she did not want to be, where she had to either do this or do nothing to save God's children from being exterminated. There's a feast in the month of March that's called Purim by our Jewish friends. But it does have to remind the people that God stepped in through this lady by the name of Esther and saved God's people. We see a widow by the name of Ruth who was down to her last dime, to the point that she had to glean stuff out of the field after the field was all picked up and harvested, and she had to live and exist on kernels. But through that lady, she met a man by the name of Boaz, and she began a new legacy where her great-grandson would become David, and down the line would become Jesus the Christ. So folks, if you and I are struggling to see God's purpose in the times we go through, I want you to rest assured he has a purpose for you. And at the end of the story, he said, go gather the leftovers, because nothing will be wasted. In God's kingdom, nothing is ever lost. All things work together for good to those who are called by God and who are loved by God and are called according to your purpose. So here's what I want today. Before you leave on this day of the time change, whatever you want to call this day, and when we get ready to listen to a mission speaker, and all that, as we get ready to celebrate this time of Easter time, the Passion narrative, maybe the best thing we can offer God is ourselves in our brokenness. In just a few minutes, we're just going to sing the song, what I've surrendered all, or what is it? I have decided to follow Jesus. To stand before God says, God, I am not perfect, but I will take what you have to given me, and I will serve you with all my heart. Lord, I come. Father, I am stepping forward to accept your Jesus to be your Son. He is my Christ. He is my Lord. He is my Savior. Lord, I will confess it before these people. I will have my sins washed away in Christian baptism. I will rise in newness of life, and I will go out there, and I will be your man, and I will be your woman. Imperfect, but perfected by your holiness and your righteousness, and I want to be a representation of that. Brothers and sisters, would you stand up as we sing this hymn of invitation? Jay?